Eleanor Mercer did not want to go out that night. The rain had only just stopped, and the stone pavements of Mayfair were still shining with that cold, dirty gleam the city wore at night. She could have stood by the window and decided there was no need to go. A headache, fatigue, anything. Sir Hadley would have understood. But Sir Hadley had insisted 3 times. In his last letter he had written it himself. "Eleanor, it has been 8 months since Lord Voss passed. You must return to society, otherwise society will forget you, and that is the worst thing that can happen to a wealthy widow." Eleanor had read the letter 3 times, then folded it and placed it in her bag. Because Sir Hadley was wrong. The idea of being forgotten by society did not frighten her nearly as much. What was truly dreadful was being remembered as Voss's young wife, as the old lord's final comfort. That had been her title for 5 years, and whenever she entered a ballroom she carried it with her, invisible but heavy, resting on her shoulders. Still she went. The Harringtons' house stood on the corner of Grosvenor Square, 4 stories tall, every window lit. The footman at the door took Eleanor's cloak and paused for a moment to announce her name. Eleanor gave a slight nod. "Mrs. Eleanor Mercer." No one turned. Of course they didn't. Eleanor stepped inside and looked around. Lemonade tray to the left, the corner to the right. Both were perfect. She chose the corner. She took her lemonade and held it. She did not drink. It was simply good to be holding something, to give her hands a purpose. Music was playing. Someone laughed loudly across the room. 2 women whispered about dresses. Eleanor heard it all, registered it, and let it pass. There was something inside her right shoe. Not quite a stone, perhaps a fold, perhaps a seam, but she felt it with every step. Eleanor lifted her right foot slightly, pressed it down again, checked. It did not go away. At that exact moment, the ballroom doors opened. Eleanor did not notice, but the room did. The music did not stop, but it seemed to slow, or perhaps it only felt that way. Conversations broke, cut in half. Heads turned, first those closest to the door, then the rows behind, then those in the corners, like falling dominoes. Mrs. Harrington's voice rang out, bright and delighted. "Duke of Ralston, what a surprise!" Eleanor pressed her right foot down again. It still hadn't gone away. She lifted her head because she had become the only one in the crowd not looking at the door, and that alone was noticeable. She turned. Julian Carne, Duke of Ralston, was entering. Eleanor had never seen him before, but she recognized him. It was impossible not to. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his black coat cut in the way every tailor in society dreamed of achieving. His hair was dark, his features sharp, but what stood out was not his face. It was his gaze. He was looking at the room, calm, measured, faintly bored. He greeted people, smiled, moved toward Mrs. Harrington, but his eyes were scanning the room at the same time, an automatic sweep. Eleanor recognized it. Lord Voss had done the same. Who was here? Who was not? Who mattered? Then Julian's gaze reached the corner on the right and stopped. A second, perhaps less. He had reached Mrs. Harrington, was shaking hands, smiling, but his gaze lingered there for just a moment. Eleanor saw it. Then she looked away, back to her lemonade, pressed her foot down once more. It still had not gone away. 15 minutes later, Julian Carne was beside her. Eleanor understood this from the shift in sound. The direction of whispers around her changed. Space opened slightly. Someone was approaching. She lifted her head. Julian Carne stood 2 steps away. Up close, he was even taller. Harder, too. But there was something unexpected in his eyes. Curiosity. Real, almost childlike, faintly surprised curiosity. "Mrs. he said. "Mercer," said Eleanor. "Eleanor Mercer." "Duke of Ralston." He inclined his head slightly. You seem to be defending this corner with remarkable determination, Mrs. Mercer. Eleanor looked at him for a moment. I'm not defending it. I'm simply standing. Julian said nothing. But he leaned right there, beside her, into the same corner. No one did that. People always left a little space around him, out of respect or fear. Eleanor could not tell which, but Julian leaned in as if the corner had been made for him as well. A fine evening, isn't it? He said. I don't know. It hasn't finished yet. Julian laughed, a real laugh, brief, an honest answer. Don't ask if you don't want one. There was a pause. Eleanor continued holding her lemonade. Julian glanced around, the room, the couple speaking, the music. Then he turned back to her. You are Lord Voss's, Mrs. Mercer. His widow, yes. Julian said nothing. But he did not leave. That surprised Eleanor, because at this point everyone said something. My condolences, though 8 months had passed, and even that felt misplaced now. Or, Lord Voss was a remarkable man. Was he? Eleanor was not sure. Or, worst of all, that subtle step back, that re-establishment of distance. A widow, one must be careful. Society is watching. Julian did none of these things. He simply stayed. The music changed. The waltz ended. Something else began. Mrs. Harrington's daughter passed by, laughing. Julian turned his head toward the sound, then back to Eleanor. Would you care to dance, Mrs. Mercer? No, said Eleanor. Why not? Because I do not wish to dance. Julian looked at her for a moment, then that same short, genuine smile again. Very well. And he stayed. An hour later, Eleanor went to retrieve her cloak to leave. As she waited by the door, Julian's voice carried from behind her, distant, speaking with Lord Carey. Eleanor did not turn, but she heard. Lord Carey lowered his voice, laughed softly. The Duke of Ralston is looking at Voss's widow. Is this the 12th engagement already? A silence. Julian did not answer. Eleanor's cloak was placed over her shoulders. The door opened. Cold air rushed in. As she stepped outside, that was the only thing on her mind. That silence. He had not answered. Not yes, not no, not even a laugh. He had simply said nothing. 3 streets away from the Harrington house, in his carriage, Julian Carn was looking out the window. London passed by. Lanterns, stone, the lingering shine after rain. Lord Carey sat opposite him, saying something. He heard but did not register it. Something was stuck in his mind. Not Eleanor Mercer's face, not her voice, not even her words. Honest, brief, unexpected. Her gaze. When he had entered the ballroom, the room had turned. Everyone had turned. They always did. Julian was used to it, to that moment, to what passed through people's eyes. Some of it was admiration, some of it calculation, some of it both, the more dangerous kind. But Eleanor Mercer had not turned. She had been looking down, at her shoe, and in that crowded ballroom, Julian had understood this woman had seen him, heard him, known he was there, and still she had not turned. Because there was something in her shoe, and at that moment she found it more important. Julian sat in the carriage, looking out. 11 times he had entered a ballroom and seen those turning eyes. 11 times he had recognized that look. Title, wealth, the name Ralston. Tonight, for the first time, there had been someone who did not turn. And now he would not sleep. The flowers arrived in the afternoon. Eleanor was in her study at the time. The papers left by Lord Voss were still unfinished. The lawyer sent something new every week, something to sign, to approve, to decide. There was a knock at the door. The maid entered, carrying white roses in her arms. From the Duke of Ralston, ma'am. Eleanor set down her pen, looked at the roses, 12 of them, white, their stems cut to equal length, the finest work of a florist, that much was clear. Priceless, surely, flowers sent by the Duke of Ralston. "Put them on the table," said Eleanor. The maid did. Eleanor sat with the roses for a moment. Then she stood, went into the corridor, took a small piece of paper and a pen from the kitchen. She returned to her desk and wrote, "Thank you, but it was not necessary." She did not sign it, placed it in an envelope, called the maid. "Take these back, with the note." Julian received the note that evening. He opened the envelope, took out the small piece of paper, read it again, a third time, this time slowly, each word on its own. "Thank you, but it was not necessary." On his desk lay 11 years of letters, figuratively speaking. 11 engagements, 11 women, hundreds of letters. He no longer remembered all of them, but he remembered their tones. The excited ones, how thoughtful, how beautiful, exactly my favorite. The calculated ones, the roses are so elegant, they match our walls perfectly. One of them, the 5th or the 6th, had sent the roses to her mother as well, and the thank you note had come from the mother. Thank you, but it was not necessary. Julian folded the paper and put it in his pocket, then took it out again, looked at it, then put it back once more. When Lord Carey arrived for dinner, he found Julian at his desk, a glass in his hand, nothing in front of him. "What are you thinking about?" said Carey. "Something," said Julian. Carey sat down, waited. Julian said nothing. Finally, Carey, "Voss's widow?" Julian lifted his head. "She sent the flowers back." Carey frowned. "Sent them back. With a note, it was not necessary." Silence. Then Carey laughed, short, surprised. "To you? She sent flowers back to you?" "Yes. No one ever—" "I know," said Julian. The music evening was 5 days later. Lady Pemberton hosted it every year, a small chamber orchestra, a guest list of 30, tea and wine. Eleanor did not want to go this time either, but Sir Hadley's wife had come personally that afternoon saying, "My dear Eleanor, it's only one evening, and the music is always lovely." And Eleanor had not been able to refuse her to her face. She went, entered, moved to the right side of the room. There was no corner here, only rows of chairs. She sat in the second row, took the program, looked. Schubert, then Haydn, then an interval, then Schubert again. It was a good program. When Julian Carn entered, Eleanor was reading the program. She did not turn. Julian saw her the moment he entered. Second row, left side, looking at her program. The seat beside her was empty. Julian greeted the Harringtons, inclined his head to Lady Pemberton, shook hands with 2 men, and walked to the second row. Eleanor turned a page. Julian sat beside her. There was a silence, brief, that strange silence when 2 people notice each other but have not yet spoken. "You don't care for Schubert?" Julian said quietly. Eleanor did not lift her head from the page. "Why do you ask?" "You turned the page rather quickly." "I had already read it." "Ah." The orchestra began tuning, violin, then viola, then cello, that strange dissonance, the most honest moment of a concert. Eleanor liked that sound. Everyone else complained about it. The old man to Julian's right had already begun to frown. But to Eleanor at least it was honest. Nothing was trying to match anything yet. Everything was simply existing. "How long have you been in London?" said Julian. 8 months. "Where did you live before Lord Voss?" Eleanor lifted her head now. Julian was looking straight at her, curious, not calculating. At least it seemed so. "Northumberland," said Eleanor, "in a small town." "Have you been able to adjust?" "I don't have to adjust, it's temporary." Julian looked at her for a moment. "You will return to Northumberland?" "Perhaps." "When will you decide?" Eleanor turned back to the program. "I don't know." The orchestra began. Schubert filled the room, that familiar melancholy, that gentle weight. Eleanor listened, truly listened, in a way few people did at society's music evenings. The woman beside her was whispering to the one on her left. A giggle came from the back row. The old man was still frowning, though now not at the music, but at his attempt not to fall asleep. Julian was listening. Eleanor noticed, from the corner of her eye, carefully. Julian leaned slightly forward in his chair, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. He was looking at the music, not into empty space, but at the music itself, as if it could be seen. That surprised her. When the interval came, everyone stood, tea was taken, conversations began. Julian turned to Eleanor. "I prefer Haydn to Schubert," he said, "though I suspect that is considered improper." Eleanor glanced briefly. "Why improper?" "Schubert is more melancholic. Not preferring melancholy makes one seem shallow. Or honest." Julian laughed, that short, unexpected laugh. "Yes, or honest." Eleanor took her tea, drank. She wanted to ask something. It came to her, almost reached her lips, but she did not. She set it aside. Julian asked, "What were you going to ask?" Eleanor lifted her head. "How did you know?" "You hesitated." A pause. Eleanor held her teacup. Then, "Do you truly like music, or was it simply necessary to attend?" Julian looked at her for a moment. "Both," he said, "but I do truly like music." "All right." And she left it there. But society did not. Eleanor learned that the next morning. The maid returned from the market with that strange expression, wanting to say something but not quite daring. Eleanor said, "What is it?" The girl hesitated. "Two ladies were talking at the market, ma'am. They don't know you, of course, but—" "What were they saying?" "They said Voss's widow is hunting the Duke. The man hasn't even recovered yet, and the woman already—" The girl did not finish the sentence. Eleanor stood still for a moment. Then, "All right," she said. "Go." After that day, Eleanor changed. It took Julian 3 days to notice. At Lady Ashworth's tea, Eleanor was across the room. Whether she had not seen him or had chosen not to, it was impossible to tell. At Lord Pemberton's dinner, they were at the same table. Julian spoke politely, smiled politely, and stayed politely distant. On the way back from dinner, Julian turned to Carrie. "What changed?" Carrie shrugged. "Society has started talking. You must have heard." "What are they saying?" "Voss's widow is hunting the Duke. The woman is probably avoiding the gossip." Julian looked out the window. London passed by. Lanterns, stone, cold. "She's not avoiding," he said. "What?" "She's protecting herself." He paused. "There's a difference." On Friday evening, at a gathering, Julian approached Eleanor with an envelope in his hand. Eleanor was speaking with a group of women, or standing at the edge of their conversation. The two were not the same. Julian approached, and the women dispersed. They always did when the Duke of Ralston came near. Eleanor remained. She did not leave, but her expression closed, that familiar closing he now recognized. "Mrs. Mercer," said Julian. "Duke of Ralston." Julian held out the envelope. "This coming Tuesday, a private recital. Small, 15 guests, real music, quite different from Lady Pemberton's evening." Eleanor took the envelope, opened it, glanced inside, read the invitation, closed it, then handed it back. "I cannot attend," she said. Julian did not take it immediately. "Why?" Eleanor paused for a moment, then placed the envelope into his hand, gently but firmly. "Because I could not see what benefit my attendance would bring you." She turned, walked away. Julian stood there with the envelope in his hand. The noise around him continued. Music, conversation, the sound of glasses. Someone passed by, greeted him. Julian nodded in return. Automatic. His eyes were on Eleanor's retreating figure. What benefit would it bring you? 11 times he had wanted to ask that question. 11 engagements, 11 women, and in each of them he had seen that look, that calculation, that weighing, and he had never asked, because he already knew the answer. Eleanor Mercer had asked it, but not to him, to herself. What is here for me? What does this give me? And she had not found an answer. Because she had not found one, she had not gone. It was the exact opposite of what Julian had expected. And precisely because of that, as he slipped the envelope into his pocket, he felt that something had shifted. What had changed he did not yet know, but something had. Dinner was at Lord Hargrave's house. A table for 12, silver candlesticks, the Thames visible through the window, or it would have been had it not been night, leaving only darkness and the occasional passing lantern. Eleanor sat on the left side, Julian at the head on the right. 4 people between them, conversations crossing over each other. Julian had seen Eleanor at the door. Eleanor had seen him, or had pretended not to. It was becoming difficult to tell. She had turned her head the other way, begun speaking to Lady Hargrave, while Julian had taken his seat at the table. The food was good. The conversations were ordinary. During dessert, Lord Carey leaned in, speaking close to Julian's ear. "I heard something about the Mercer family today." Julian held his wine, did not set it down. "What?" "Debts. Serious debts left from the father's gambling. Before Mrs. Mercer married, the family was nearly ruined." Carey paused. "Her marriage to Lord Voss, it was an arrangement." Julian set the glass on the table. "Who told you?" "Hargreaves' lawyer. It came up during the proceedings after Voss's death. Some of the family's debts were settled through Voss before the marriage." Julian said nothing. At the far end of the table, Eleanor was saying something to Lady Hargrave, quietly, with a serious expression. Lady Hargrave laughed. Eleanor smiled, that polite smile, not real, but effortless. Julian looked away. Something in his mind was beginning to settle into place. A wrong puzzle, but the pieces were still fitting together, in their own logic, in their own direction. She sent the flowers back, kept her distance, said, "What benefit would it bring you?" And now this. Julian drank his wine. After dinner, the men went to the library, the women to the drawing room. Julian stayed in the library for 5 minutes. He did not smoke, did not join the conversation, made an excuse, and left. Hargreaves' house was large. There was a corridor that opened to the back garden. Julian went out that way. The garden was cold, early October. The leaves had begun to turn, but had not yet fallen. A stone path, hedges lining both sides, a small fountain in the distance, and beside the fountain, alone, someone removing her gloves. Eleanor. She must have heard the sound, footsteps on stone. Julian had never been good at walking quietly. She did not lift her head, but her shoulders changed, tensed slightly, then deliberately relaxed. Julian approached, stopped, left a distance of 1 step, 2 steps between them. Eleanor was still looking at her gloves, black, small. There was a slight tear on the right glove, near the thumb. "It's cold," said Julian. "Yes," said Eleanor. Silence. Julian did not want to speak, or he did, but not like this, not with these words, but the puzzle in his head would not stop. Voss, debts, arrangement, distance, what benefit would it bring you? "I think I understand you now, Mrs. Mercer." The moment the words left his mouth, he regretted them, but he could not stop. Eleanor lifted her head, looked at him, directly, without expectation. Julian continued. He could have stopped. He did not. "You are looking for the next wealthy man." Silence. A leaf fell in the garden, close enough to be heard, an insignificant sound. Laughter drifted from the library in the distance. Someone had said something, others had laughed. Eleanor's expression did not change. It did not freeze. Julian had expected that, the sudden shock, the shift into defense. None of it came. Her face simply closed, slowly, like a door secured from within. And in that closing, Julian saw something familiar, something he did not want to see. Exhaustion. Deep, old, far older than this evening. "If that is what you think," said Eleanor. Her voice was even. No anger, no fragility, no defense. "Good evening, Duke." She turned. "You didn't answer." Julian did not know why he said it. His feet had taken a step, his mouth had opened, automatic, without thought. Eleanor stopped. She did not turn.
She stood on the path, her back to Julian, hands at her sides, still holding one glove. There was no wind, but the garden was cold. Their breath showed white in the air. 1 second passed. 2. Then Eleanor spoke, still without turning. "Because I am not required to answer that question." Her voice was the same, even, tired, but now there was something beneath it. Not steel, not fragility, simply certainty. "The list of people to whom I do not owe an account of my life is a long one, Duke of Ralston." A pause. "I have added you to it." And she walked away. Julian remained in the garden. Now the cold could be felt. Though his coat was on, it made no difference. He looked at the stone path, the direction Eleanor had gone, the door. The door closed, quietly, not with force. His hands went into his pockets. "The list of people to whom I do not owe an account of my life is a long one, Duke of Ralston. I have added you to it." She had not defended herself, had not explained, had not shown anger, or perhaps she had, but not in a way he could recognize. She had simply refused. Flat, clear, tired refusal. Julian turned and walked back toward the library. Late that night, they got into Carrie's carriage. On the way back, both were silent. London passed outside, Julian looking out the window. "What happened?" said Carrie, at last. Julian paused for a moment, then told him, briefly, plainly, what he had said, what she had answered. Carrie fell silent. That was unexpected. Carrie usually did not stay silent. He usually said something immediately. But this time he looked out the window, held his glove, waited. "Julian." "What?" Carrie turned. His expression was strange, neither judgment nor sympathy. Just something flat, almost painful. "You've been engaged 11 times, Julian." "I know." Carrie paused. The carriage turned a corner. Lantern light slipped inside, then passed. "What did you see in this woman's eyes?" Julian did not answer. Carrie did not wait. He turned back to the window. Julian remained without an answer, but the question would not stop, turning in his mind, searching for its answer. What did you see in this woman's eyes? At the ball, in the corner holding her lemonade, at the music evening, looking at her program, in the garden, holding her glove, her face closing. There had been no money in her eyes, no calculation, no weighing. Only that exhaustion, old, deep, long before this evening. And Julian had told her, "You are looking for the next wealthy man." The carriage stopped. Carrie got out. Julian did not get out immediately. He sat a moment longer, in the dark, in the cold. Then he stepped out. Apologizing was not Julian's habit. It was not a matter of pride, or not entirely. It was something else. For a man who had been engaged and disengaged 11 times, who was called society's cursed duke, who left whispers wherever he went, to apologize meant to open a door. And when doors opened, people entered. And when people entered, they saw things.
After seeing, they either stayed or left, and Julian had lived through being left 11 times. But Carrie's question would not leave his mind. What did you see in this woman's eyes? Lady Whitmore's Thursday tea was a small gathering, 15 at most 20 people. Julian would not normally attend, but he had learned from Carrie that Lady Whitmore was close to Eleanor Mercer, and instead of asking Carrie, "Will Eleanor Mercer be there?" he had sent a note to Lady Whitmore himself. "If I am available on Thursday, I may stop by." Lady Whitmore's reply came the same day. "Please do come. It would be an honor." When he entered the tea room, Eleanor was by the window, not alone, speaking with Lady Whitmore's daughter, but again at the edge of the conversation. That familiar posture, present but not entirely, there but distant. Julian took a tea, did not drink, waited. 10 minutes later, Lady Whitmore's daughter stood up, went to greet someone else. Eleanor turned toward the window, looked outside, the garden in autumn colors. Julian approached. Eleanor saw him in the reflection before she heard him, in the glass, behind her. Her shoulders made that same movement again, that slight tension, but she did not turn. Julian came beside her, stopped. "Mrs. Mercer, Duke of Ralston." A silence. Julian held his tea. It was good to hold something, to give his hands purpose. Eleanor had done this before, with her lemonade. Now Julian understood why. "I was wrong," he said. Eleanor turned. She looked at him, this time truly looked, with that careful, measuring gaze. Julian continued. "What I said in the garden, I was wrong. I apologize." Short, direct. He added nothing. No explanation, no excuse. No, "I was angry." No, "I misunderstood." Just that. Eleanor watched him for a moment, then turned her head, looked back out the window. "All right," she said. Julian waited, said nothing more. "All right," said Julian. "All right." Eleanor was watching the glass. Apology accepted. "That's all?" This time Eleanor turned, and there was something unexpected on her face. Not exhaustion, not that closing, something almost lighter. "What were you expecting?" she said. "That I would cry? That I would take the pages back? What exactly is one supposed to do when an apology is made?" Julian paused for a moment. Then, without intending to, without realizing, he laughed. Lady Whitmore hosted a small dinner that evening, informal for those who had stayed after tea. Eleanor did not want to stay, but there had been Lady Whitmore's "We are only 6, please," and Eleanor had not been able to refuse. Julian had stayed as well. The table was small. Eleanor sat across from him, not directly opposite, slightly to the left, but close enough. Throughout dinner, conversations came and went. Julian turned to Eleanor twice, and Eleanor answered, this time a little less guarded, a little less measured. After dinner, the others moved to the drawing room. Julian and Eleanor remained at the table for a moment, by accident, unnoticed, in that brief transition between rooms. A second passed before Julian spoke. "Your marriage to Lord Voss," he said. He paused. "Did you have to?" Eleanor did not freeze, but she waited. She looked at the fireplace. The fire was burning, small, steady. She placed the napkin in her hand on the table, folded her hands in her lap. The silence stretched. Julian was not counting, but it was a long silence, and he did not fill it. He waited. At last, Eleanor spoke. "Yes." One word. Then she continued, slowly, carefully, weighing each sentence as she set it down. "My father brought the offer, explained it, Voss's proposal, the family's debts, what it meant. Then he left the room. The decision was mine. She paused. I chose it. Why? Because I saw no other option. Her voice had not changed, even, but something lay beneath it, something worn with time. Or perhaps I did, but those options had costs, different costs. Choosing Voss was the option with the clearest cost. Clearest cost?
Eleanor turned. 5 years, no more than that. Voss was old, ill. At the end of 5 years, there would be no debt left from my family and no marriage. She paused. That is exactly what happened. Julian said nothing. You are judging me, said Eleanor. Not a question, a statement. No, said Julian, and hearing himself, he was surprised. Because it was true. He was not judging. He understood. That was not what he had expected. Another silence followed, but this time it was different. It was not heavy. There was the sound of the fire, distant voices from the drawing room, the clink of a glass. Julian spoke. My 11th engagement ended last year. Eleanor looked at him, said nothing. I won't give her name. Society already knows it. He paused. It lasted 3 months. She was a good woman, intelligent, beautiful, from a good family. And I tried. I truly tried. What happened? At a dinner, 2 months after the engagement, her father was seated beside me, asking about the estates, the land in Yorkshire, the house in London, the estate in Scotland. One by one, how many acres, how much income, what condition. I answered. He paused. Then I looked across the table. My fiancée was speaking with her mother, laughing, looking happy, and for a moment her eyes met mine. Julian placed his hands on the table, flat, steady. I cannot fully describe what I saw in that look, but I recognized it. Calculation. Nothing but calculation. His voice did not change, but something passed through it, felt as it moved. 3 days later, I ended the engagement. Eleanor was silent. 11 times, said Julian, 11 times I saw the same look, sometimes immediately, sometimes months later, but always. He paused, and each time I thought, perhaps I am wrong. Perhaps this time it is different. Perhaps. Not once, said Julian, and this time his voice was different, lower, as if not speaking to the room but to himself. Not once did someone ask me my name. Julian, how are you? Not the title. Me. A log cracked in the fire. Laughter drifted from the drawing room. Julian lifted his head. Eleanor was looking at him, not with that cautious, measuring gaze, with something else. Julian could not name it. Julian, said Eleanor. She paused. How are you? 2 words. Julian heard them, and for a moment he did not know what to do, because no one had ever asked him that question like this, with that voice, with that gaze. 11 engagements, hundreds of society evenings, Carrie, his mother, his lawyers, his servants. No one had used that tone. No one had asked. They had asked about the title, about the wealth, about the land, even about his health. But how are you? Truly, just that? Never. Julian could not speak at first. There was something in his throat, unfamiliar, uncomfortable. I don't know, he said at last. I haven't thought about it in a long time. Eleanor inclined her head slightly. Then think about it. They left late. At the door, as Eleanor took her cloak, Julian stood beside her. There was much that could be said, or nothing at all. Both were possible. Julian said nothing. Eleanor did not either. But as she stepped out, Eleanor turned for a moment. Do you still have the lavender fields on your estate in southeastern Yorkshire? She said. Julian was surprised. I do. How do you know? A friend of Voss mentioned them years ago. I have never seen them, but... She paused.
He said they were beautiful. And she left.
Julian sat in his carriage. London passed outside. Lanterns, stone, cold. The same London every night, yet tonight it felt different, and Julian could not say why. Eleanor's voice was in his mind. "Julian, how are you?" And his own answer, "I don't know. I haven't thought about it in a long time." It was true. He had not thought about it, not even after the 11th engagement, not even after Carrie's question. He had thought about what he would do, not how he was. The two were not the same. Eleanor knew that. And Julian knew this as well. This woman was not looking at his money. She was not, because she knew exactly what money was, what it meant, what it could take away, and what it could never give. She had spent 5 years learning that, and she would not spend another. Julian had not yet put it into words, but he felt it, in the carriage, in the dark, as the lantern light slid across the glass. This woman was not here for him, and that was something he had not felt in 11 years. Society's memory was long, and it had no mercy. Within 2 weeks, Eleanor's name had been mentioned at every table, once at least, more at some. Voss's widow has been seen with the Duke of Ralston at Lady Whitmore's dinner. Then, seen again, this time at the Pembertons' concert. Then, I hear Ralston sent flowers, rejected but still. Gossip had its own mechanism. It took a small truth, filled in around it, expanded it, shaped it, and in the end, what emerged still resembled the truth, but was no longer it. Voss's widow has secured the Duke. That sentence had traveled from Mayfair to Belgravia in a week.
Eleanor heard it at Lady Ashworth's morning coffee. Not directly, but from the next table, 2 women whispering. They did not say her name, but Voss's widow was enough. She returned home, handed her cloak to the maid, went into the study, sat down. On the desk lay the lawyer's latest letter, one final document regarding Voss's estate awaiting her signature. Eleanor took the pen, set it down, looked out the window. Outside, it was late October. The trees were nearly bare, the sky that flat, gray London gray. Eleanor liked that color, in truth, the color of waiting, a sky that had not yet decided. There was a knock at the door. "Ma'am," the maid entered, holding a card. "From Lady Harrington." Eleanor took the card, read it, set it on the table. Lady Harrington. Julian's aunt. Eleanor knew that. And the card was polite, perfectly courteous, but the message was clear. "Would you be available for tea sometime soon? I would like to make your acquaintance." Lady Harrington's house was in Belgravia, large, cold, everything in its place. Eleanor went. Not going was not an option. Not going would have said something greater, to society, to Julian, to everyone. Lady Harrington was in her 60s, her hair completely white, her posture perfectly straight, her eyes seeing everything. She poured the tea herself, did not leave it to the maid. Eleanor noted that. "Mrs. Mercer, my condolences for Lord Voss's passing. Belated, I apologize." "Thank you, Lady Harrington." "How are you?" "I am well." "Truly?" Eleanor paused, held her cup. "Well enough."
Lady Harrington smiled, but her eyes did not. They calculated. "You know Julian now? We have met a few times. You must have heard what society is saying. I have. And?" Eleanor set her cup down. "And nothing, Lady Harrington. Most of what is said is not true." "Most," said Lady Harrington, "not all." Eleanor looked at her for a moment. The woman was honest. That surprised her. She had not expected it.
"Julian is a good boy," said Lady Harrington. Her voice had shifted, still even, but something beneath it now. "But the name Ralston is heavy, not easy to carry, and not easy for the person beside him either." She paused. "I wanted you to know that." "Is that a warning?" said Eleanor, softly but plainly. "Information," said Lady Harrington. "What you do with it is your choice." That same week, Lady Voss came. Eleanor's former mother-in-law, Lord Voss's sister, 80 years old, every movement deliberate, every word measured. She had not sent word, she had come to the door. Eleanor received her in the drawing-room, asked if she would like tea. Lady Voss declined. "This will be brief," she said. "You are seeing Julian Khan, Duke of Ralston. We happen to be in the same circles from time to time. Society interprets it differently. Society interprets everything differently." Lady Voss's eyes narrowed. "Eleanor, my brother treated you well. Yes. I expect you to keep his name clean." Silence. Eleanor did not rise. That was important, not rising. She remained seated, looking straight ahead. "Lady Voss," she said, "I was a good wife to Lord Voss for 5 years. That was the extent of my obligation, and I have fulfilled it. As for the rest of my life, I will not account for it to you or to anyone else."
Lady Voss remained still for a moment. Then she stood. Eleanor accompanied her to the door. The door closed. Eleanor turned back to the drawing-room, teacups on the table, the fire nearly fading. She sat down, folded her hands in her lap. She was tired. This fatigue was familiar, the kind she had carried for 5 years, explaining, defending, apologizing simply to exist. With Lord Voss it had taken one form, now another, but the weight was the same. That evening she went to Julian's invitation, a small dinner at Lord Carey's house. She did not want to go, but not going was also an answer, and Eleanor was not yet ready to give one. Throughout dinner, Julian was beside her, at the corner of the table, Eleanor slightly to the left. They spoke, ate, laughed with the others. Everything appeared normal. After dinner, in Carey's library, everyone dispersed, small groups, scattered conversations. Julian came to Eleanor. "My Aunt Harrington invited you," he said, not a question. "Yes. What did she say?" "That it is difficult to carry, the Ralston name." Eleanor held her glass. Julian looked at her for a moment. Then, "Did Lady Voss come as well?" Eleanor turned. "How did you know?" "I know." His voice was even, but something lay beneath it, not anger, something closer to weariness. "If I had no money, would you still be here?" Eleanor heard him. And the first thing she felt was exhaustion, that familiar deep exhaustion, because she had not expected this question tonight. She had expected it from Lady Harrington, from Lady Voss, from society, not from Julian. But he had asked, and something inside her tightened, thin, taut, close to breaking. She did not turn away, did not leave. She stayed. "If you had no money," she said, her voice even, but the tension beneath it was audible, "would you still be asking this question?" Julian froze. Eleanor continued, not faster, not louder. "In a world without your money, without the title Duke of Ralston, would you have had 11 engagements, broken 11 engagements? Would you have seen calculation in every woman's eyes? Would you have felt the need to ask this question?" Julian did not answer. "Money shaped you," said Eleanor. "It shaped me as well.
We are both here because of money, from different sides of it, but from within the same thing." She paused. "And you ask me this question without knowing that." Something passed across Julian's face, understanding or the edge of it, but not fully yet. Eleanor set her glass down. "Good night, Julian." This time she had used his name. Julian noticed, and it struck sharper than Duke of Ralston ever had. Eleanor left. Julian remained in the library, alone in the middle of a crowd. At some point, Carrie came to him, said something. Julian heard but did not register it. If you had no money, would you still be asking this question? He knew the answer. No. Without money, that question would not exist. Because without money, there would have been no 11 engagements, no seeing calculation in every glance, no whispers of society, no decades of suspicion, no distance.
And for Eleanor, the same was true. Without money, there would have been no Lord Voss, no 5 years, no exhaustion. They were both inside the same thing, only from different sides of it. 3 days passed in silence. Julian did not write. Eleanor did not write. Society continued to speak, but neither of them heard it anymore, or chose not to. On the 4th day, as Eleanor was having her morning coffee, the maid brought an envelope. "Ma'am, from Ralston." Eleanor opened it, then paused. The handwriting was not Julian's. It was finer, more rounded, the hand of someone older. She read, "Mrs. Mercer, I have heard your name, not from society, but from my son. That is a rare thing. Would you come for tea? I find myself curious about my son. You seem to know him. Respectfully, Duchess of Ralston." Eleanor placed the letter on the table, looked out the window. Early November outside, the first cold, the sky that flat gray. She looked for a long time. Then she stood, called the maid. "I will write a reply," she said. The Duchess of Ralston's house was in Kensington. It was different from Julian's house in Mayfair. Smaller, warmer, with things gathered in every room, paintings, books, a piece of embroidery left unfinished in a corner. It was a lived-in house, not one arranged for display. The maid led Eleanor into a small room. Through the window, the garden was visible. 2 trees, a wooden bench between them. In November, the trees were bare, but the bench remained. Wet, solitary, but still there. Mrs. Mercer. The Duchess of Ralston entered through the door. Around 65, her hair dark like Julian's but threaded with white. Her eyes the same as his, the same color, the same directness. Her movement was quiet, her entrance quiet, but when she entered, the room changed, filled somehow. Eleanor stood. "Sit," said the Duchess, more a request than a command. "Tea is coming." The tea arrived. The Duchess poured it herself, like Lady Harrington. Eleanor noted that. For a while they spoke of small things, the weather, November's early cold, the difference between Kensington and Mayfair. Eleanor answered politely, properly. Then the Duchess set her cup down. She said, "Julian spoke of you. What did he say?" "Very little." The Duchess smiled, brief, genuine. "That matters, in fact. Julian talks a great deal.
He says everything. He has never been able to hide what he feels, not since he was a child." She paused. "But when he spoke of you, he spoke little, carefully." Eleanor said nothing. "His father considered that a weakness," said the Duchess, her voice unchanged, but something passed beneath it, old and heavy. "Ralston men are not like that," he used to say. As a child, Julian tried to understand, to conceal, to control. He could not. She paused. "I did not want him to, but his father—" The sentence did not need finishing. "Society says the same thing," Eleanor said quietly. "Yes." The Duchess looked toward the window, the garden, the trees, the bench. "She was engaged 11 times. The same thing happened each time. The women saw him, understood him, and were afraid. Or their families were. The result was the same." She turned. "Each time he closed a little more." Eleanor listened. "But with you," said the Duchess, and for the first time something in her voice broke, small, controlled, but it broke. "For the first time, he did not close." Silence. Eleanor looked at her cup. The tea had gone cold, untouched. Then she lifted her head. "Why are you telling me this?" The Duchess met her gaze directly. "Because if I had told it to 11 women, perhaps one of them would have stayed." Eleanor walked home. From Kensington to Mayfair was a long walk, and it was cold. Her cloak was not quite enough. But Eleanor walked, not to think, but the opposite, to let her thoughts go. Step, stone, breath, repeat. The Duchess's voice was in her mind. 11 times he closed, but with you, for the first time, he did not. And Julian's voice, not once, just once, if someone had asked me my name. And her own voice, that night in Carey's library, "Money shaped you. It shaped me as well." All of it was true. And Eleanor knew this as well. Being true was not enough. Sometimes what was true was still impossible, still too heavy, still too old, still too exhausting. But sometimes it was not. Sometimes what was true was simply a door, and a door was either open or closed. When she turned onto her street, she stopped. Someone was standing at her door. Julian Carne, Duke of Ralston, stood on the steps of Eleanor's house, in his coat, with gloves, no hat. His hair was disheveled by the wind. His hands were in his pockets. There was no carriage, which meant he had walked, or had dismissed it, which was no different. He was here. Eleanor took a step, stopped. "Did my mother send you?" Julian lifted his head. "No." "Did you speak with her?" "No." He paused. "I came." The street was quiet. At that hour Mayfair always was. Fewer carriages, fewer sounds. In the distance the faint rhythm of a horse. Then it faded. Julian stepped down from the stairs. 1 step, 2. He stopped directly in front of Eleanor. 2 steps between them. He did not speak at once. Neither did Eleanor. Then Julian, "My answer to that question is this." Eleanor waited. "If I had no money, I probably would not have asked it." His voice was even, no apology, no defense, just plain. "Because without money, I would not have doubted so much all my life. There would have been no 11 engagements. I would not have searched for calculation in every glance." He paused. "You were right." Eleanor said nothing. "And your answer," said Julian. This time it was almost a question, but not quite. Eleanor looked at him. "My answer is this. I needed Lord Voss's money. I do not need yours." She paused. "That difference matters." "It does." "Yes." Silence. "Do you know," said Julian, his voice lowered now,
meant only for the two of them, not the street. I was engaged 11 times, and in none of them did I speak of this, the money, the calculation, the doubt. In none of them. Why? Because none of them asked. Something inside Eleanor tightened, that thin, taut thread that had been stretched for days. But this time, it did not break. It loosened. Slowly. Quietly. The first drop of rain fell on Eleanor's shoulder. Neither of them looked up. The sky was already that gray, that waiting color. It was not a surprise. Then the second drop. The third. Julian was still there. Eleanor was still there. "Julian," said Eleanor. He paused. "Is there something you do not want to ask me?" Julian looked at her, with that direct, unguarded gaze. The rain was falling now onto his hair, his shoulders. "Mrs. Mercer," he said, corrected himself. "Eleanor." It was the first time he had used her name. "Will you marry me?"
It was not grand. He did not kneel. There was no diamond, no ballroom. Just a wet street under November rain, 2 steps between them. Eleanor looked at him for a moment. "I have one condition," she said. Julian waited. "To society, I am still Lord Voss's widow. They will talk for a long time, you know that." "I do." "Are you ready for that?" Julian took a step, closing one of the 2 between them. 11 times, he said, I was not ready for the right person. He paused. "What if I try once more?" Eleanor said yes. Under the rain, on a wet street, in a moment society would never know. It was not grand, but it was real. In the 3rd year of their marriage, Julian struck the table at a dinner. Not violently, but in the silence of the library it was heard. The guests froze. Carey held his glass. Lady Whitmore leaned forward. The matter itself was trivial, a land dispute, a lawyer's mistaken letter, a small issue unresolved for 3 weeks. Julian had grown impatient, as he always did, and this time he struck the table. Eleanor looked from the far end. Then she laughed. Truly, quietly, she held her cup, drank, and laughed. The guests were surprised. Carey was surprised. Julian was surprised, most of all. "What?" said Julian. "Nothing," said Eleanor. "Go on." Julian looked at her for a moment. Then that short, unexpected laugh came. His anger dissolved. The moment dissolved, leaving only that laugh. Dinner continued. Society spoke for a while. Ralston has finally married, Voss's widow, yes. The 12th engagement did not break this time. How did she manage to keep him, I wonder?
Then Lord Ashworth's daughter was caught in a scandal. Then a close friend of the prince was seen in Vienna with someone unexpected. Then other things, other names, other whispers. Society moved on. It always did. At the end of winter, Eleanor entered Julian's study. She was looking for a document. The lawyer had requested something. Julian was not home. The lower drawer of the desk was open. Eleanor found the document. It was already on the upper shelf, but the drawer was open, and her eyes caught on it. A small box, wooden, unlocked, and inside, neatly tied, organized, 11 bundles of letters. Each bundle in a different hand, each marked with a name, in Julian's handwriting, fine, careful. Eleanor looked for a second, then closed the drawer. That evening, after dinner, Julian went to the study. Eleanor remained in the sitting room reading, or pretending to read. The two were not the same. When Julian returned, Eleanor was still reading.
He sat across from her. "Did you find something?" Eleanor did not lift her head from the book. "No." Julian looked at her. 1 second. 2. Then he laughed. Truly, quietly, that short, unexpected laugh. "You are lying." Now Eleanor lifted her head, looked straight at him. "I know." They both laughed. The fire had been fed. It burned well. Outside the window, the rain fell. That London rain, fine, persistent, unending. Eleanor returned to her book. Julian sat across from her, holding nothing, simply sitting, in that familiar posture, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. The rain continued. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them needed to. Thank you for staying with the story until the very end. Let us know where you're watching from and how the story affected you. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one.